A baby is born, and within hours, it does something no instruction manual ever had to teach it. It reaches. It clings. It presses its whole body against whatever is warm and close enough to hold on to. For most of the 20th century, scientists had a simple, tidy explanation for why. Babies love their mothers because mothers feed them. Attachment, they said, was really just appetite wearing a disguise. Feed a baby and love follows automatically the way a dog follows the hand that holds the bowl. It's a clean theory. It's mathematical. It's also completely wrong. And the man who proved it wrong did it by building 2 fake mothers out of wire and cloth, and then doing something to baby monkeys that no ethics board would ever approve today. Here's the theory everyone believed going into the 1950s because on paper it made perfect sense. Psychologists at the time were dominated by behaviorism, the school of thought that treated almost every emotion as a learned response to a physical reward. Some of the era's most respected voices, including the influential psychologist John B. Watson, argued that parents should limit affection toward their children altogether, warning that too much kissing and holding would create weak, overly dependent adults. Except one researcher at the University of Wisconsin thought that explanation didn't sit right. Harry Harlow worked with rhesus monkeys, and in his lab, infant monkeys separated from their mothers became fiercely attached to the soft cloth pads lining their cages, clutching them, screaming if the pads were removed. That single, almost accidental observation is the seed the entire experiment grew out of. To test it properly, Harlow built 2 artificial mothers. The first was a bare, angular frame of welded wire, fitted with a baby bottle so it could deliver milk. The second had the same wire frame underneath, but wrapped in soft terry cloth with a warmer, more face-like wooden head. This second mother delivered no food at all. If the old theory was right, the infant monkeys should have bonded with the wire mother, since she was the one keeping them alive. That is not remotely what happened. The baby monkeys spent almost every waking hour clinging to the soft cloth mother. Even though she never gave them a single drop of milk, they would climb over to the wire mother only long enough to feed, then scramble immediately back to wrap themselves around the cloth-covered frame, sometimes stretching their bodies across the cage so they could keep one paw on the cloth mother while reaching over to nurse from the wire one. When Harlow introduced something frightening into the cage, the infants didn't run to the mother who fed them. They ran straight to the cloth mother, pressed themselves against her, and only then worked up the courage to look back at whatever had scared them. Contact comfort mattered more to these infants than nutrition itself. The behaviorist's tidy theory had collapsed entirely in front of Harlow's own cameras. But this was only the beginning of what Harlow was willing to do to find out how deep this need actually went. Because proving that baby monkeys preferred a soft mother over a functional one was one thing. What Harlow wanted to know next was darker. What happens to an infant that gets neither? He began raising some monkeys in total isolation, alone in bare steel chambers with no contact with any other living creature. No cloth mother, no wire mother, no other infants, nothing soft, nothing warm, nothing that moved, just steel, silence, and a food dispenser. The monkeys that came out of these chambers did not look like monkeys anymore, in any behavioral sense. They rocked back and forth obsessively, for hours. They bit and clawed at their own bodies until they drew blood. When placed with other monkeys their own age, the isolated infants had no idea what to do. Many simply froze, huddled alone in a corner, rocking, while the rest of the group interacted around them as if they weren't there. Here's the detail that should stop you cold, though. Harlow discovered that timing mattered enormously. Monkeys isolated for the first 6 months of life could sometimes be rehabilitated. But monkeys isolated for longer than that critical window, closer to a year or more, often never recovered any semblance of normal social behavior, no matter how much rehabilitation was attempted afterward. There appeared to be a specific, narrow developmental window during which social contact wasn't simply beneficial. It was structurally necessary. And then Harlow pushed the isolation experiments even further, into a piece of apparatus he named the Pit of Despair. A small, steel, funnel-shaped chamber, narrower at the bottom than the top, designed so a young monkey placed inside had no way to see out or climb out. What emerged from extended time in the pit resembled something closer to a clinical depression than ordinary fearfulness. They stopped moving. They stopped exploring. Some of Harlow's own students and colleagues began to describe what they were seeing less like an experiment and more like a portrait of despair itself, manufactured on command. But there's a layer to the story that almost never makes it into the retellings. It's about what happened when those isolated female monkeys grew up and became mothers themselves. Harlow's colleagues called them motherless mothers. Some completely ignored their own infants. Others reacted to their infants' attempts at contact with outright aggression. In some of the more severe cases, physically attacking their own offspring when the infant tried to nurse or cling. The isolation hadn't just damaged one generation. It had erased the ability to pass on basic maternal behavior to the next one entirely. So here's the reframe the entire body of research eventually forces you toward. Attachment isn't a lucky side effect of survival. It's closer to being a separate, parallel survival requirement in its own right. And this is where the story stops being about monkeys at all. Physician Renee Spitz had been documenting something eerily similar in human infants raised in institutions with adequate food but almost no consistent physical affection, a pattern he called hospitalism. Psychiatrist John Bowlby was already arguing that a consistent, responsive caregiver relationship was a core developmental requirement for human infants, on the same order of importance as nutrition. Harlow's monkeys gave those human observations something behaviorism had never offered: a controlled, mechanistic demonstration of exactly why contact and comfort mattered so much. Here's the part of this story that complicates any tidy hero narrative, though. By the standards even of his own era, what Harlow did to those infant monkeys would not be approved today. The isolation chambers, the pit of despair, the deliberate, sustained deprivation of contact during a critical developmental window. This wasn't incidental cruelty. It was the entire method. The rise of the modern animal welfare movement in psychological research developed in no small part as a direct response to exactly this body of work. The same experiments that proved comfort was a biological necessity were themselves built by systematically denying that comfort to living creatures, on purpose, to see exactly how badly they'd break. So if you've ever wondered why a crying baby calms down the instant it's picked up and held, rather than simply fed, or why skin-to-skin contact is now standard practice in maternity wards worldwide, this is where a significant part of that understanding actually came from. Not from common sense and not from tradition, but from a cage in Wisconsin, 2 fake mothers built out of wire and cloth, and a scientist who needed to watch exactly how far an infant would go to hold on to something soft, even when it offered it nothing else at all. The monkeys never got to choose what any of this was for. What gets done with what they revealed is still entirely up to us.